Sierra, how you
Hey,
doing?
what's up?
What can I help you with? What do you want to debate about?
Uh, like I messaged you earlier, I kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about um that conversation that you had a while back. I forget. I watched the video, but it was the guy where you're talking about basically like nuclear power versus renewables.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I listened to that. I mean, like I can start off by saying that I'm pro nuclear myself too, like obviously, right? I think nuclear, like installing nuclears in the United States is a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think like maybe my takeaway from listening to that is it kind of seems like maybe you give nuclear a little bit too much credit than I think is really justified.
Okay.
Like it almost sounds like you're treating it a little bit like a silver bullet for energy generation, and you're underestimating like renewables on the flip side. That's
Okay.
kind of what my takeaway from that was.
Okay. So why am I overestimating nuclear then?
So, like, do you think that, for instance, you think when you say like we should build nuclear in the United States, like, what does that mean? Like, how much of the United States power grid do you think we should be powering with nuclear?
Good question. I don't really have a number for you there, but if I had to like just give like off the top of my head without me doing any research whatsoever, I would probably be safe to say anywhere between 60-40, 70-30, I think, because like there is a good portion of the Midwest that would do quite well with renewable wind and solar because, let's be honest. I mean, the Midwest has a lot of sun and it has a lot of wind. So like I don't think that they would have an issue with establishing consistent power and having minimal battery support to support the entire population, which is not a very large population. But I don't think that that's the case for, let's say, a lot of the cities in the east. They're just very large. I think you're going to need a lot more power than what is currently sustainable.
Well, so like, okay, so you're saying like in the Midwest, there's like a lot of wind resource that's available. Obviously,
Mind
that's
you,
true. Like in
that's
the
no
Southwest.
research at all, right? I'm not research. Sorry, I interrupted you, but that's no research. Just so you know, right? You could easily prove me wrong on this.
Well, that's why I wanted to like have like a friendly talk with you about this because like as you know, or maybe I'm pretty sure I've told you this before, but like this is what I do for a living, right?
Hmm.
Like I work in power systems.
Okay.
So like when you say stuff like, yeah, like the Midwest has like a lot of wind resource obviously available. Um, the Southwest has like a lot of solar resource available because it's very sunny. Um, why do you think that like the regions kind of like matter? I mean, like it kind of sounds like you're talking about it as if the energy, the power that we generate in a place like, I don't know, Nebraska that's like super windy, or like Arizona that's super sunny, that like the power has to stay there for some reason. I mean, you realize like it's not difficult to transmit power over like really, really, really long distances.
Don't you need like
Like you can have.
repeaters and stuff to do all that?
No,
Okay, help
not
me out.
really. No. I mean, like, so for instance, you know, the entire, okay, so like the US energy like grid system, right, is really kind of, there are different regions of the US energy grid, and they're called ISO regions. ISO stands for like independent system operators, and there are a bunch of them, right? You can look up a map of that, it'll show you like kind of which parts of the United States belong to which. But in general, the United States power grid is kind of divided into three parts. There's the Eastern Interconnection, which is basically like everything east of like Colorado, the Continental Divide, and like Texas. And then there's the Western Interconnection, which is kind of like everything on the other side of the Continental Divide. And then there's Texas. Texas is its own thing. It's famous for being its own thing. It's the ISO is called ERCOT, the Energy Reliability Council of Texas. And then we also have interconnections from the Western and Eastern Interconnection into Canada. But the point of that is to say, like, for instance, in the Eastern Interconnection, that whole grid is like interconnected. There
Hmm.
are grid interconnectors that connect all the ISOs together already.
Okay.
So like the power kind of, when you look at this kind of there's a concept in power system called like power penetration. Basically, it's like if you look at a single source of generation, how far out into the system from the generation point does it kind of trickle out, right? But like the way it really works is that all of this stuff is interconnected over across like hundreds or thousands of miles, and there's lots of generators and load centers around the way. But that energy kind of all reverberates out and mixes together. But
So
like if you look at
why
it
is
from like
it
a
that
point
you
A to
have
point
like
B
power? Sorry.
well, the last point is like it's more complicated than that. But if you wanted to simplify it down to like a point A or point B type thing, like point A is over here, point B is like 1,000 miles away. You can transmit power that far. It's not
Great,
really a
great.
big issue.
Well, I guess now then my question is like, why is it that we seem to exhibit that when it comes to these point A and point B metrics, it appears to be that they have the power relatively close. Why is that? As opposed to like 1,000 miles, it seems like there's more points of failure if you have like 1,000 miles as opposed to like, I don't know, 20 miles.
So that gets into like some more. It depends on like how technical you want to make this conversation, because so like the long the like the when you all right, if we simplify it down and we just say that like we have a big power plant right here, and then you can imagine that like that power plant has transmission lines that are going out to like different load centers, and like one might be 20 miles away, one might be 200 miles away, one might be 2,000 miles away,
Oh,
right?
hold on. Just so
Um,
you know, by the way, if you see me like coughing or anything like that, I'm sick. I've been sick all week, and I got my tissues here. But just so you know, like if you see me kind of like sounding a little bit weird or whatever, that's why. I'm perfectly fine. I'm just sick right now. Sorry. All right, continue.
well, so I don't need to make. I think the way I was going with this is going to make it too complicated. At the end of the day, like you can transmit power very long distances. The longer distances that you go, the more losses are involved with that, right? But that's going to be a function of your transmission voltage level, right? So if you're transmitting it at like a pretty low voltage, the losses and then the associated like voltage drop that you're going to get from that is going to be very high. The more that you boost that up, like the less your losses are going to be, but then you have to have like more expensive equipment to deal with. But like the point of all of that is there are examples in the world that exist right now. There's a few in Europe, there's a few projects that we're working on in the United States, and the most examples of this are actually right now in China. China has like they do a lot of their power generation on hydropower, and a lot of those hydropower facilities are located like way far west in China, like out in the mountains, like coming out of like the Tibetan plateau. That's they have like huge hydropower facilities out there.
Okay.
And they have like HVDC lines that transmit at like
Well,
incredibly high voltages
I
that
mean,
go straight from that location to big cities over like thousands of miles. So like in principle, this is not like something that's like you can
I
transmit
get it,
power
but
from places
I'm
where the
asking like why
resources
is it
available.
I mean is the reason why that they tend to not cover these ridiculously long distances because of additional points of failure, or what is it?
Yeah, it could be additional points of failure. It could be cost when you have the like at a simple level, when you're transmitting power, the longer distance that you're transmitting it, if you want to minimize losses, you have to transmit at an extremely high voltage, which means that you have to invest in like equipment that's capable of handling like those high voltages, right? So that makes it more expensive, but it's kind of like a trade-off, right? It's like, okay, there's like a lot of renewable, it could be hydropower, it could be wind, it could be solar. There's a lot of resources out in this location region that we can tap into, and we can generate a lot of power cheaply. Does the cost benefit of being able to generate cheaply but invest in like this more expensive transmission infrastructure to get it where we need to use it, like does that work out? And like most of the time it does, because like the generation side of renewables is really 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 cheap.
Okay. Well, I mean,
um,
I don't know. I'm just not having I don't see how my point that I had made a while back, I guess, makes a difference. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
so like there's also like some limitations with like to kind of bury the lead a little bit here, like from my experience and kind of what I know and stuff like that, it seems to be the case that like theoretically, going forward into the future, if you wanted to make like the best balance of like investing in nuclear and then investing into other things like, you know, hydropower, renewables, wind and solar, stuff like that, seems to be the case that like probably the best balance would be like 20%, maybe up to like 30% nuclear, and then the rest kind of like a diversified portfolio of everything else.
Okay.
Because nuclear is good because you can build like really big, large, centralized generation facilities that have like a lot of the nuclear generators are like big rotating machines. They create like a strong inertial base load. They promote grid stability, all of that. But there's a trade-off to that, and the trade-off is that nuclear is not that great at load following or being dispatchable. It kind of is most economical when you can build a nuclear facility, run it at 100% capacity, like basically all the time, and then just leave it there, right?
Okay.
If you're constantly having to ramp down and ramp up nuclear power, first of all, it won't do that very quickly, and like most of the
don't they have to shut down the nuclear plants, like I think for about 35 days to refill the rods, right? Isn't that the case?
And bringing a nuclear plant, like, I mean, with new technology, it might be a little bit better, but like typically bringing a nuclear power plant all the way down to zero, doing that, and then like on the other end of that equation, bringing it from zero all the way back up to full output is like a process that takes hours to days. And in grid operation time, that's like a long, long, long time.
Yeah.
You need to have dispatchable resources that can react.
Yeah, I mean, that's usually a communication that happens between the power grid itself or other people who are generating power on the power grid, and you know, to let them know, hey, there's this downtime and that they have to increase by this much during this downtime, you know.
Right.
So
that's true.
I mean, I guess I just don't I still don't see any issue with nuclear. Like, do you see my issue here? Like, you're telling me that I'm overplaying nuclear, but like I can acknowledge everything that you have said, and my overplaying of nuclear has not changed, nor has my underplaying of renewable resources has not changed either.
Well, it's because when I heard you talking to the other guy, it sounded like what you were saying was that you were in favor of nuclear instead of renewables, and I don't think that that's like the right way to look at it.
Well,
because, like,
obviously there's going to be some level of combination. I just think that like when it comes to like overall sustainability, I really don't think that investing our money into like, you know, lithium that degrades over time, you know, that requires like, you know, pretty nasty recycling efforts, as well as pretty nasty mining techniques, whereas like nuclear does not have that problem.
Well, that's the other thing too. So
like do you see that we could like power the entire world entirely off of like, for example, wind and wind and solar? All 8 billion people?
So I don't know about like the whole world, but like in a country like the United States or like in Europe that's already like super developed, transitioning over to, I think there's lots of research and papers that have been written and stuff where have demonstrated that in theory you could, but in practice there's probably no reason to force yourself to do that, because you can make use of like other resources like nuclear and stuff like that, right? So like in theory I think that you could, but in practice there's no reason to really do that. You know, like if we can just find the best way to decarbonize like our systems and modernize like our infrastructure, that's not necessarily 100% nuclear, but it could be like 70% nuclear or 70% renewables rather. So the other issue with nuclear is that, as you know, like it's super expensive, but it's super expensive in a very specific kind of way, and that is that, you know, compared to like traditional resources like coal, when you look at like what the cost is that goes into like the levelized cost of energy generation, with coal, it's mostly there's a little bit that goes into the principal investment, the cost to construct the facility, but then most of your cost is going to be fuel. Same thing with natural gas. With nuclear is special because almost all of the cost of nuclear goes into the principal investment, the cost to actually build and develop the facility. What that means is that basically, in comparison to other like combustion fuel resource power plants like coal or gas, in nuclear, your cost to operate the facility is not influenced very much by how much power you happen to be generating at any given time, right? So like in coal, if you need to ramp the power, if there's less grid demand or something like that, and you need to operate at 50% capacity, well, that means that you're going to be using like 50% fuel, which means that your costs are also going to proportionally go down. With nuclear, that's not the case. So if we have an overcapacity of nuclear plants and we need to curtail them because there's not enough grid demand to support all of that generation, all of those operators are going to massively lose money. Because their cost to operate the facilities
Well,
don't
I
go
mean,
down.
like I would not
They
be
just lose
against
revenue.
I mean, we already have a heavily regulated industry regarding power due to just how sensitive it is. You know,
But
I
the
mean,
point of
so
me
like,
saying that,
but
yeah,
I still don't see how nuclear somehow I should underemphasize it. I'm still stuck on that.
no, but what the point of what I was just telling you is that that's a reason why that it doesn't make sense to install. Like if you install any more nuclear capacity in a place like the United States, more than what you can run at 100% all the time, anything above that point becomes a waste of money because you'd be better off making up that supply with other resources that are more dispatchable.
Okay, I just
That's the point.
okay. I mean, I see what you're saying. I don't know. I just don't see a like a huge uh difference, I guess, in what I would argue. It's interesting information, though. I'll give you that.
The point, all the point, like the point I'm trying to say is like I'm in favor of nuclear. Like I said at the beginning of this conversation, I'm in favor of nuclear. But there's like this my thesis in this conversation is that there is a theoretical upper limit on how much nuclear it makes sense to install, and that's probably
Sure.
somewhere
Yeah.
around
Okay.
like
All
30
right. I think maybe it's just like a misunderstanding, right? Like you wouldn't say that. You know, I'm not arguing in favor of just 100% nuclear. I think it's more of a mixed system, but I would, in general, be in favor of nuclear, right, over
Yeah.
solar and wind. Does that?
Over so even that's yeah, because well no, that's the thing, because I think that like like going forward into the future, like the most ideal grid, probably the way it's going to work out is that it makes sense to have a higher percentage of your generation coming from solar and wind than nuclear.
Why so?
Nuclear would be like, because solar and wind are cheaper. I think that
Well, they're
listening to you talk,
scalable, but I just don't think they're as sustainable.
why not?
Well, because of lithium, because of the battery problem.
That's what I was about to bring up. I think that you overestimate the degree to which renewables are reliant on batteries. They're
They're
reliant
not
on batteries,
reliant on batteries?
not as much as I think you think they are. Because they are reliant on batteries to a point, but I think that you overestimate the extent. And also, there's like an inverse relationship. So basically,
Well,
the amount to which renewable resources are reliant on batteries is going to be like inversely proportional to how good your transmission infrastructure is going to be,
okay, so maybe
right?
I'm getting this wrong, but last time I checked, when it comes to renewables, the problem is that most of the wind isn't blowing on sundown, right? It's blowing when the sun is up and it's exciting wind.
Not
And then
generally.
that's not the
Peak
case.
wind, yeah, peak wind is generally in the morning and in the evening, and then peak solar is
Come on.
obviously in the middle of the day. You can look at these curves. They somewhat the part of the thing one of the things that's like kind of convenient with renewables is that the
Hold on.
wind and solar supply curves somewhat complement each other.
Peak wind conditions typically occur in the late morning to early afternoon, around 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. This is due to the sun's heating of the Earth's surface, causing Earth's air to rise, creating a pressure difference that leads to stronger winds. Okay, so it's between 10 to 2 p.m. And then the next problem is you have the same issue when it comes to solar, and you and I are both aware that peak times in using power is 6 to 8 p.m. because
Yep, the duck
everybody's at
curve.
home Everybody's got their power on. They're using their power during this time. That is not when the wind is blowing generally, and that is not when the sun is shining. So you are having the peak amount of power being used in a time where sun and the solar and the wind aren't going to be able to sustain that. So the solution to this is that you have to apply batteries in order to have a consistent power. So that way, when the sun isn't shining, you still have power. And when the wind isn't blowing, you still have power.
Yeah. Everything that you're saying in general is true. What I think that you're missing is that you're looking at this to too absolute of a degree. So for instance, like the solar supply curve is obviously a lot more strict than the wind supply curve. So the solar supply curve is dependent on the sun, right? Being in the middle of the day is when you're going to have the most.
Do you need to use batteries? Are batteries necessary?
Yeah, always to some extent, but they're going to be more necessary if you have like pretty shitty transmission infrastructure. Like for instance, in California, one of the issues in California right now is that they have had to invest a shit ton into batteries. And the reason for that, it might actually surprise you, because the reason for that is because California is kind of doing it. It's kind of like Texas in the sense that it has its own like power market, ISO, that's like kind of operates independent from the rest of the country, and they don't have like major grid interconnections with a lot of their neighbors, so it's very difficult for them to exchange power with their neighbors into like other parts of the system of like the Western United States, which means that like there's not a whole lot of flexibility.
Are you I don't know if you're addressing what I'm asking.
I'm addressing like a situation where like this is a situation that would force you to use like way more batteries than theoretically you would need to use otherwise. Because if you're not able to, the point
is that you need the batteries, and a lot of them, right?
Yeah, you need the batteries to some extent.
And batteries go bad over time, right?
Everything goes bad over time.
Well, I agree, but like especially batteries.
Especially I mean, like most battery systems on utility scale are sized for like 25-year operating lifespans, typically.
Okay.
So that's there's a
so do we have like an efficient recycling process, or is it this really dirty, nasty thing that's terrible? And or mining, which is also terrible.
I don't know that much about battery recycling, but like
yeah, they pull it out. They pull it out. They melt it, and they make a lot of gas. A lot of horrible, horrible gases. You need to wear gas masks for this. It's very, very dangerous. And there's a lot of fluid that is completely unusable. It's pure waste. They have to dispose of it somehow, and they can't go into the ground.
Yeah, but I understand that, but it kind of sounds like you're describing like most industrial processes to me.
What?
Like they're all
except
all
nuclear.
Like
nuclear doesn't have that problem.
Well, I mean, like you don't. So this is one of my This is one of the problems I have when because people bring up things like with renewables. It seems like all of a sudden people are hyper aware of like different resources that need to be extracted, rare earth materials and stuff like that. People don't realize that every piece of like technology, especially for like power systems, requires these materials. Rare earth metals are typically like most commonly used in the construction of permanent magnets, which a giant nuclear facility would use a shit ton of in its generator. So like that's not like when you're talking about extracting these different resources.
You're saying nuclear materials? Process, thorium is everywhere for starters.
No, I'm talking
all it
about,
requires is the refining process.
I'm talking about the metals. No, I'm talking about the metals that go into generating, like producing the permanent magnets that have to be used to construct the actual generator. You need rare earth metals.
Generators are used in every single power plant. There's nothing you can do about that.
Yeah, that's my point. But like, my point is
that but you don't just have the generator. You got the generator and this really wasteful battery.
I mean, yeah. I don't know, like lithium. I mean, like,
so why not go for the more sustainable route?
because it's not sustainable beyond a certain point for the reasons I've laid out, because it's incredibly expensive to operate renewables above a certain point. You're just wasting resources and
I
money.
mean, as far as
Like,
I'm
money
concerned, what I can see is that there is a country that did go mostly nuclear,
France.
and that
Yeah, I know
France.
France. The reason France is
So are
able to
they
get away
doing
with
like
that,
super bad or what?
no, the reason why France is able to be mostly nuclear is because they share interconnection. Like, all of Europe is a single interconnection, which means that they're able to exchange power. They're able to when
Well,
they are
wait, the United
overproducing
States is the
nuclear
size of
power.
Europe. Why can't we do that here?
No, because you're missing what you're like. Let me finish. All right.
Okay.
Because the reason why France is able to be like super high percentage nuclear is because France doesn't exist as like an individual thing in Europe as far as power systems go. All of Europe is a single grid interconnection, which means when France is they get to run their nuclear facilities at like 100% all the time. And if there's too much power, they can just sell the power across like borders into like Germany or whatever other countries in Europe, and then they can import power when the nuclear isn't enough to meet their demand.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why. So if you actually zoom out and you look at all of Europe, which is the proper way to look at it, then nuclear still is like a pretty small percentage of all of Europe's generation. And that's how it should be in the United States too. It should be like 20, 30%. Something like that.
Okay. I mean, me personally, I'm not finding it super convincing, but I mean, I like you.
I mean, it's just hard to like, yeah.
You're gonna
at
have
the
to
end of the
send me
day,
some
like,
research, and then maybe I can change my mind in front of you.
at the
Okay.
end of the day, like just as one like last thing, I guess, if you imagine like a sinusoidal curve, right? Then imagine like you have like some sort of x-axis, and let's say like the sinusoidal curve is like above the x-axis, and there's like a certain static offset such that like the troughs of the waves on that sinusoidal wave or whatever are like a certain fixed position above the x-axis. You kind of picture like what I'm talking about?
Sine wave, like as in like the wave, like just a.
Like,
I'm not
imagine
familiar
like a
with
sine wave.
sinusoidal.
Okay, a sine wave. Imagine like typically a sine wave is going to be like about the x-axis, right? So like
I'll
the
just look it up.
peak
It's fine.
and the valley are going to be equidistant from the x-axis, right?
Okay. Cool. All right.
So the point of what I'm saying is, if you imagine that whole thing is shifted up such that like the bottom of each trough of the wave have like a certain delta y to where the x-axis is. If you imagine that that is like kind of the energy demand curve of a whole system over time, the amount of nuclear power it makes sense to build is basically from that 0 point up to the bottoms of the troughs. The point that doesn't change, the point that's always a static offset. That's the amount that it makes sense to build all nuclear for that portion of your grid demand. The part that doesn't change.
Okay.
I don't know if I explained that very well, but like that's basically.
No, I didn't make a whole lot of sense, but.
Okay, I don't know. Whatever. The energy demand fluctuates on a daily basis.
Yes.
But there's a certain amount that doesn't fluctuate. Like, you can remove all the amount that fluctuates, and then there's underneath that there's a base load that's always the same pretty much all the time. That's what you meet with nuclear. That's what makes sense economically to meet with nuclear, because then you can run those plants 100% capacity day in, day out, all the time, unless they need to be taken down for maintenance. Then you maximize their economic efficiency.
Can't you just like reduce the total power output of a nuclear power plant by simply lifting your control rods, so that way you reduce the reaction?
Yeah,
so I don't understand.
I tried to explain to you earlier. Yeah, I tried to explain to you earlier that the more that you do that, like, you massively lose money when you do that, because your cost to operate the facility.
I would imagine power output has more to do than just making money, don't you think?
Not to people who want to build and operate and own nuclear facilities. No, like, they're not going to do it.
Obviously, nuclear is not a sustainable measure from the private industry perspective, but it's absolutely sustainable from a from a not private industry perspective, right? There could be heavy subsidy.
Taxpayers, like,
well, but no, that would be a benefit. That would mean that we would basically be completely clean, right? We would operate no more pollution whatsoever. Our total footprint would be very low, and we would basically we wouldn't even have to mine lithium from third world countries. It's like a
Well,
win-win.
We have like
Or
huge
lead,
lithium
lead
reserves
as
in the
well. They
United.
also do lead.
We have huge lithium reserves in the United States that we're not even touching right now, but that's like a separate issue.
Who's
I
gonna
mean,
mine that, man? Come on, you think a bunch of you really think that a bunch of Americans are gonna start mining lead?
if it pays well, yeah, sure.
Do you have any idea how dangerous lead is?
Do you yeah, do you know how do you have any idea how much better PPE we have than third world countries here?
I guess so, but like, bro, like it just doesn't seem
We have
like
OSHA here
it doesn't
and
seem
stuff. Like those
sustainable.
countries don't.
Yeah, but it just doesn't
Yeah,
seem sustainable.
well, what's not sustainable is operating like a grid that's like 100% nuclear, but then like
I never
at any
argued
given
100%
point of the
nuclear.
day,
I never argued 100%
or
nuclear.
like
I'm saying mostly nuclear,
like
just like what
anything.
France does. We can do it.
No, not even. I already explained to you like
France
why
is like
France, because you're
70%
looking.
nuclear.
Yeah, but you're looking at France as a country. Power systems don't care about countries. France is interconnected with the whole rest of Europe.
What?
So
But
when
we're
you look
not
at Europe as a
interconnected
whole,
with the whole rest of. But we're still the size of Europe. So that doesn't make any sense. What is
it
this
has nothing to
argument?
do with size. What I'm saying is that when you look at France alone as a country, it's like 70% nuclear. That's true. But
Okay.
France is interconnected with every other country in Europe. So when you zoom out and you look at the whole European interconnection, then nuclear is a much, much smaller percentage, a
But
percentage
you
that
realize that
actually
France
works.
sells their nuclear. They sell their nuclear. Could you imagine if we started selling our power to Mexico and
Who?
Canada? Mexico and Canada. Why not?
I mean, like, yeah, I mean, like, maybe that would work. I don't
It's
know. I don't know if they'd
amazing.
be able
And
to
not only,
afford our
and
nuclear
you know what
power.
would be even better? We can lift up our neighbors. I guarantee, if you think, I guarantee you right now, Mexico absolutely has power problems. I promise you with 100% certainty. They would, they would,
I mean,
they would
I don't
clamor
do any work.
at this
I don't do any
consistent
work
power
in
output.
Mexico. I don't do any work in Mexico, but like I said, like I'm pro nuclear to a point. I just think that you need to do a little bit more research because I think when you do, you'll realize that there is a point for nuclear above which like you're just pissing money away as an economy into it. Like
Okay,
it's just wasting money.
fair enough.
And renew like and you'd be better off like supplementing all the rest of it with a combination of hydro, wind, nuclear, some battery storage here and there where we need it, geothermal, and then you just do a constant balance of all of those resources on a very good interconnection where we can transmit power from point A to point B to point C to point D over vast distances, balance that whole system, and that'll work. It'll be cheaper, it'll be more affordable, and it'll be completely carbon neutral, and we'll like yeah, that's
I mean,
the
like
real way.
honestly, like
And
carbon neutral
that's
is
where the
important.
industry
It's
is
just like
actually
a
moving.
semantics. Yeah, that's fine. That's fair. I mean, obviously, I
Yeah.
can't change the way that that the policy is going. You know, and I genuinely believe the reason why that we went towards solar and wind is because one, it's scalable,
They're cheap.
as in they can just two, it's cheap, and three, it doesn't take a decade to make one. Right? That's
Nope, it takes like 2 years at most.
yeah, so so I think because like our term limits are anywhere between 4 to 8 years for the president, if you do get the funding for nuclear, well, then like assuming you even get both of your 8 years, you don't even get to see the benefits of that. So like why would a
Oh, yeah.
president ever put their money into something
Well, it's not
that
just
they
politics
want to
either,
well, but I'm
It's
just saying like
investment,
that
too.
makes sense, right? That makes sense.
right? I mean, well, also if I'm an investor, right? What am I going to invest my money in, right? Am I going to invest my money into like this nuclear project that won't even switch online for 10 years and then I won't get a return on that investment for maybe even 20 years? Or I could take that same money, I could invest it into like 100 megawatt solar plants or something like that. And the development process is like basically like a year and a half or 2 years. And then once they're up and running, there's zero fuel costs, very minimal maintenance costs, and I get an ROI in like 3 years from my initial investment.
Mhm.
Like it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
It's a no-brainer. But I'm going to invest in that, right? And that's what we're doing. That's why the industry is heading in that direction. And there's like challenges and there's teething issues, but I work in the power systems industry and like everybody there is a broad consensus that like moving to inverter based generation, right, like wind, solar with battery energy storage and then like transmission upgrades using like HVDC lines and stuff like that, that is like the consensus of that's where we're going. And then we're all hoping that like in parallel, like, yeah, 20%, 30%, build up some nuclear as a base load, build that strategically throughout the United States, a big facility here, a big facility there, like, dotting the landscape like that would be perfect. That would be great.
Okay.
But that's basically all I got.
Cool, man. Do you got anything else for me?
No, I don't think so. Like I
Cool,
said, I
man.
mean,
It was nice talking to you, and thank
nuclear
you
is,
for the
yeah,
lesson.
yeah, nuclear is great, but like, just everything has its limitations, including nuclear, and those limitations have nothing to do with it's going to explode or anything like that. They have to do with technical power systems limitations and economic limitations. That's the takeaway you should have. All right, see ya.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.